have in front of you. This is number one. Who wants to tell me what a poll tax is? Yeah, Winston.
An animal tax that has to be paid to vote.
To vote. Okay. Yeah. Come up and get one of these. It's on the table right here. Okay, now there's something that you need to add to this. Right there. What you need to add will have something to do with how did this discriminate against African Americans? Now I want you to think. I mean, the law doesn't have to say black people have to pay the tax. And it can still discriminate against black people without saying that. So how does something like this discriminate against African Americans? Yeah, Nick?
The question said to the point that they could not pay the price due to how they had not had jobs, due to the life.
To put it simply, that's very good. To put it simply, former slaves are poorer. So it's going to affect African Americans at a greater rate. Literacy test. A test you will have to pass in order to be able to vote. Simple enough, right? Oh, Mr. Beavers, that sounds fair because we don't want dumb people who don't know anything about government to be able to vote, right? Well, that sounds not very good to our modern ears. I think we all appreciate the idea that having knowledge about what's going on in the country is a better thing to have when you vote than not knowing anything and just voting because you like the candidate's hair, right? But even if you take that aside, this is still discriminatory. It was meant to be discriminatory against African Americans. How is this going? Was this going to, in southern states, going to discriminate against African Americans at a higher rate than white people? Ethan? Former slaves were not allowed to be educated. They're no longer slaves anymore, but they still weren't allowed to read or write. How are they going to pass a test? I gave you the citizenship test for immigration. Hopefully you all saw how, I don't know, some of you struggled with it a little bit. Some of you did fine. If I was to give you one of these literacy tests from the Jim Crow era, I think that there might be one voter in here, maybe, because they were hard. Some of them had to translate Latin in order to be able to vote. What? Yeah, Nick, go ahead.
One of the other things were that it's constructed art is a way for
Oh, yeah.
them to control who can vote. So for white citizens, they would vote by just passing in easier literature.
Very correct. Very good. Now, if you know anything about Southern culture, you might know that there are still a lot of poor white people who couldn't pay the poll tax and couldn't pass the literacy test. So that leads us to the grandfather clause. The grandfather clause said that white people, it didn't say white people, it just said if your father or grandfather could vote, then you can vote. You were grandfathered in. That means that you were, if they had been able to vote before this policy took place, then you should be able to vote too. If your father, grandfather could vote, then no literacy test, no poll tax. That sounds like a good deal, right? But how does it discriminate against African Americans? Yeah. Now, what I'm not seeing is people writing this down. I'm not typing this on the board for my health. Can you please start writing this down now? Everybody? Preston, go ahead and close your laptop, please. Go ahead and get this part right here. Get the why. Why is this discriminatory? I know it's Pumpkin Show Monday, but that doesn't mean you're not supposed to be thinking right now. Not relevant right now. We're focusing on this. Former slaves, fathers and grandfathers were not voters, so they couldn't vote. The grandfather clause did not help them in any way whatsoever. Okay, now I'm going to stop right now. I'm going to come around and make sure that you're writing this because I just asked you to write it. Whole tax and literacy test. All three of them so far. I want the underlined things on there. Please underline it so I can see that you're actually doing what I asked. And this is life for formerly enslaved peoples, and then their children, and then their grandchildren, and then their children's children. I mean, this is the late 1800s. We're talking about at least 1880s through 1960s. So you're talking about 4 generations of people who are no longer slaves who are not allowed to vote. And by the time we get to the 1960s, when there are voter registration drives to try to get these great grandchildren of former slaves to be able to vote, they're like, no, we don't really want to. A, the Klan might get us, and B, we're just not used to this. It's not something that, and so it's taken a while to try to overcome that stigma. What is segregation? How about a female? Yeah, Ellie, thank you. Separating people based on race. In addition to the voting restrictions, which are the first 3 terms, there were laws throughout southern states that said white drinking fountain, black drinking fountain, white restroom, black restroom, white part of a movie theater, black part of a movie theater, white part of a bus, black part of a bus, once we get to buses, white part of a train, black part of a train, white school, black school. Now, if you're thinking that that's unfair, just wait. Jim Crow laws southern state segregation laws. Those body of laws that you have in your, when they talk about Jim Crow in history, it's basically all of those laws put together. Now, do me a favor. I have here an excerpt from the Mississippi Constitution of 1890. This is just an excerpt. And one of the reasons I'm giving this to you is because I've seen parts of Southern state constitutions on the end of course exam. And what you have to do is click on the part that is about the poll tax, or click on the part that's about, whatever. So let's practice that real quick. Just so you know, when it says electors on here, that's another word for voters. That's the word that they used in Mississippi in 1890 to talk about voters. So elector means voter. Will you put a star next to this section? See how it's section 207, section 243, etc.? Will you put a star next to the section that is the literacy test section? You put a star next to the section that's the literacy test section. For those of you watching this at home, I'm going to put the document on the screen. There should be later. Okay, as far as grades being due, Winston asked a question about when grades are due. Now that we have a pause here, let me address that. I'm supposed to cut it off tomorrow. I'm not supposed to take anything after tomorrow because you've had all this whole time to do this stuff. And so that's what I'm sticking with right now. If you think that you should be exempt from that, then you need to have a private conversation with me, and that probably should be in the form of an email so that I have a record just in case anybody wants to accuse me of being, what's the word, playing favorites. And no, I don't give out extra credit, as the syllabus said, to individual people. If I ever give out extra credit, it's to the entire class, in which you've had several extra credit opportunities. Okay, what section should be starred? Zoe? Section 244 should be starred. Notice in there it says the electors of the state need to be able to read and write certain parts. Circle the section that talks about having to pay in order to be able to vote. Circle it just so I don't get confused with your question. Yeah, if you're going to be a juror, but you can still see like it's maybe apply not just to voting but also to that too. That's good. Morgan, which one do you have for the poll tax? Section 243. Now, going beyond voting, there are other restrictions too. Have you ever heard of the word miscegenation? Miscegenation, I'm going to spell it on the board, those of you who are listening. miscegenation, miscegenation. Anybody know what that word means? Yeah? Good guess. Misogyny is like that. So that part is the same, but these you're on the right track as far as it being discriminatory. Miscegenation is another word for interracial marriage. Interracial marriage. Find the part of the Constitution of Mississippi that says black people and white people are not allowed to marry, and put an X next to it. Let's put an X next to that one. Which one, Joe?
Section 263.
263. It was illegal for you to marry a person of an opposite race or a different race. That wasn't repealed until the 1960s, and the Supreme Court had to weigh in on that. And appropriately, the Supreme Court case was called Loving versus Virginia, because the couple's last name is Loving. So there you go. There is one in there that talks about school segregation. Can you put a rectangle next to that one so I know that you know which one we're looking at? A rectangle next to it. Logan found it. Which one is it, Logan?
207.
Section 207. And let me ask you one more here. No, I think that's about it. Notice the last one. This doesn't have anything to do with race, but it has something to do with religion. If you deny the existence of a supreme being, you're not allowed to hold any office in the state of Mississippi. So I thought that was interesting, if nothing else. Yeah, that definitely would violate the First Amendment nowadays. Is there somebody at the door? If you're not going to knock, you're not coming in. Okay, now go down to Plessy versus Ferguson. And I don't think that very many of you got here, and that's fine if you didn't. Number 2 is asking you what were the facts of the Plessy versus Ferguson case. So does anybody know anything about this man? Yeah, what do you know about him? He was 1/8 African American. That means of his great grandparents, 7 of them were white, 1 of them was black. And in Louisiana, and many southern states, that was sufficient for you to be considered black, and therefore sufficient for you to have your rights taken away from you. Now, that just shows you how absurd this whole system is, that they're going to go even to that kind of fraction, right? We don't think that anybody should have those rights stripped from them, right? But that's how absurd that they're going here. What happened to him? What was his beef? Yeah.
He was denied
In the white section of a train, the Louisiana law said there is a separate car for black people. Whites and blacks have to be in different cars. Okay, so the ruling of the case. So you know what? Let's go down to this one right here. What does the 14th Amendment say? And you all have already written, hopefully, that I put up there, citizenship if you are born here, right? And if you're a citizen, you get equal protection under the law. So let me ask you this. Do you think that having a white car and a black car on a railroad train is equal protection under the law? Does that sound equal to you? Well, no, right? We don't think that today. We don't think that you should separate people based on race. That's horribly racist, et cetera, right? But here's what the Supreme Court said. Separate but equal. That's the 3-word phrase that we get out of this. Please make sure you get that down. Extremely important. Separate but equal. If the white car and the black car are of equal quality, then the 14th Amendment has not been violated. If the white school and the black school are of equal quality, then the 14th Amendment has not been violated. You can have separate but equal. And so the Supreme Court upheld segregation throughout the southern part of the United, and actually in some northern states too, for the next 60 years. Yep.
If they were like relatively a state, feel like it was fair in one state, those black people were feeling discriminated more likely.
Making a like a safety argument for African Americans. Here's what Brown versus Board of Education said. Brown versus Board of Education, about 60 years later, said separate. This is not on your notes. Can never be equal. And this one was specifically about schools. And what they did was they showed black kids dolls. There's a white doll and a black doll. And they asked the kids, which ones do you want to play with? Guess which ones the black kid said every time? Said the white doll. Why? Because white is better. That's what they'd been taught. So no matter what kind of argument you make about safety and all that kind of stuff, the Supreme Court now is saying separate can never be equal, because look at how they were treated. And in fact, if you look at number 5, was separate ever equal? No, it wasn't. The black school was always worse than the white school. And look at this picture. Let me show you this picture. I think that this picture can help sum it up. Here is the reality. Here was the reality. In the 1930s, 1940s, whatever. Look at what we got here as far as restrooms go. Do you see discrimination here? And not just the discrimination that you have a separate black restroom. What's the discrimination here? How is this unequal? Yeah. Yeah. Black men and women have to use the same one. White men and women get their separate ones. Ladies, I'm sure all of you can attest that you really don't want to share restrooms with dudes, because we smell. Just kidding. That's a anti-guy joke. Look, white waiting room. Being shown the door. Can't go in there. You know, on interstate bus travel. Right? This is the kind of stuff we're talking about. Now, at this point, if you want any extra credit on that crossword, you can give me it tomorrow for less extra credit than what I gave people today. Here's what I want to do now. I'd like to see what you remember from about the last week of learning.
Finna hop on some Kahoot now, aren't you? Mr. Beavers.
Justin won the last one that we did, and that was on September 30th. That was all day. Justin got the highest out of... Oh, nope, it was... Nope, sorry. It was somebody third period. Who was it? Sorry, Justin, he beat you by a nose. It was Jacob Chester featured by names last time. Yeah. Sure. If you want to move up closer too, that's fine. 1, 2, 3, 4. If you're at home and watching this, you just play along. Boop. No former presidents. Why would you pick George W. Bush out of all the ones you could pick? He's just not that cool. One more. Let's see. This last one is going to be who was Justin W. Okay, that's fine. I'll go with that. Spell the 3-word ruling from Plessy versus Ferguson, all lowercase letters. Just the first word of the 3-word ruling. So many people misspell this word, it's not even funny. Blank but equal. What goes in the blank? It's the 3-word ruling from Plessy. Wow, one person. One person.
I didn't know we were going to spell it.
One person. Separate. This is how most people spell it with an E right there. It's separate. Separate. Yeah. Rip. Justin's in the lead. Named the era that attempted to put the nation back together after the Civil War, and it failed to protect black rights. Okay, antebellum period is definitely not right because antebellum means before the war, and Reconstruction was after the war. Oh well, good try. Good job, 12 of you. 13th Amendment did what? All right. All right. Does anybody know what red is? Yeah? Very good. 18th. You will need to know that. That's after Pumpkin Show. They're catching up, Justin. 14th Amendment. Good. Literally, we just said prohibition is 18th, but that's okay. Now, this next one, the 15th Amendment gave all citizens the right to vote, but remember, citizenship was considered to be mostly a male thing, just so we remember that. Somebody thinks the 15th Amendment also freed the slaves in addition to the 13th Amendment. I think somebody's just spamming me. Somebody trolling me? I'll find out. I can go look at who just did that one, and then I can punish you accordingly. Native American assimilation.
I've never heard of that.
Well, you should have, because it was supposed to be a thing you did on Wednesday last week when I had a sub. Whole big form on it. Have you done that one, Logan? Let's check and see if Logan's done it. Probably not. Nope, you haven't. That's why you haven't heard of it. All right. Not that I'm trying to call you out. Multi-select, which is not a Jim Crow law. Jim Crow means segregation. Jim Crow means separating the races in public places. So this is just me being technical. Technically, voting restrictions are not Jim Crow laws, because technically voting restrictions don't separate you physically in a public place. But if you consider these three to be part of the Jim Crow era, that's fine. There's really nothing wrong with that. Just kind of a way for me to teach that. There you go. The Supreme Court case that upheld the notion of separate but equal.
Oh no.
Ooh. Big yikes. Which led to the removal of federal troops from southern states. Good. This is another one you don't know, Logan, because you didn't do that form either. Oof. Oof. Why split Indian tribal lands into separate plots for individual families? What was the point of that? That might be a secondary thing. That's not a bad guess. But the idea was assimilation, right? Let's make them more like white people so they have their own plot of land to farm. Battle Little Bighorn. How many of his men survived? None. Ended armed resistance. There's definitely a spammer. Battle of Wounded Knee. Something like that. It was the Ghost Dance, which led to the Battle of Wounded Knee. Oh, epic battle. This is for all the marbles. Oh, no, it's not. Psych. Homestead Act, good. Most of you.
Oh man.
Buffalo, make sure you look at all those quizzes and Quizlets. Help you study tonight. Big test tomorrow.
Oh no, bro. Oh no.
Well, that was so much.